Welcome back to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle King. And the goal of this podcast is to help you create an ecosystem of academic excellence. Hey, if you like the introduction, leave us a comment, like the episode, and share it with somebody that you know that's in this episode or in this industry as a whole. Hey, we have somebody today that is doing some absolutely amazing and cutting edge things in the field of not just education, but also industry. She has a load of experience, actually decades of experience in customer success, but she's also been able to transition her experience and what she's learned in corporate America. And now she's transforming how educators and how leaders and how students show up in the classroom. It's just phenomenal work that she's doing. And I'm going to bring her on. To be able to just talk to you about how we do this work at the absolute highest level. NaTasha, how are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. Now that we got the audio and the sound right, I am so excited for us to jump straight into this conversation. Before we get started, because this is not about me, this is all about you. Can you talk about, without saying titles and without giving any accolades, who are you?
I am someone who is all about growth and development. If you had to give me one word, maybe two words, personal development is like my passion. That is the thing that I pride myself on, but also to help others. Because if you can develop personally, if you have that level of awareness of self, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, then you can become whatever version you need to be to excel at whatever that thing is. And so for me, my whole, career, even if you talk to my family, it's always been about growth, development, being better. And I feel like I do that because I understand myself. And so, that's the thing that I try to get the message across to others is when you know yourself, when you have self-awareness, that's going to be your springboard for anything that it is you're trying to do, because you don't really know where you're going if you don't know what your starting point is. So that's my goal, is to really help people be the best version of themselves. And that's what I strive to do.
My son, he's 9, and he just started getting into working out and track. And then we have a daughter, she's 2. She's in her, we'll call it her terrific 2 phase. But when I'm working with him on his track, he's progressively grown over the past 6 weeks that we've been working together, and his times are getting down. And what you just said about growth mindset and just personal development, it's so amazing. And I've worked in schools for a decade, and it's not always what our children come with. And if they don't have the right environment around them, it's kind of like, I can only imagine why and how and where these children end up and adults end up as a whole. When did this click for you? Like at what moment was this the thing? Or were you in an environment your whole life essentially where growth mindset and development and striving was a part of the DNA?
I would not say that it was my environment. I grew up in rural Virginia, very small area. If I named the county I was from, nobody would know. But me personally, I've always been a goal-oriented, super competitive with myself type of person. So when I learned more about growth mindset and emotional intelligence, that was like the thing that clicked. But probably the one thing that really clicked, about 17, 18 years ago, I was introduced to something called Personality Plus. And since then, it's evolved into what's called Wired That Way. But it was all about understanding your natural personality wiring and how we were all created with certain strengths and abilities. And I was like, wow, but also that we have certain differences. And so the things that I used to think that other folk had deficits in, it wasn't that they had a deficit, they were just different from me. And it's interesting you use the analogy of your son with sports. I could speak to that all day. So my son is an adult. So you have the young ones. I have adult children. My son he'll be 26 and my daughter's 31, but they were both athletes. My son, very much so. He was ran track. He played football in college. And it was always, I could see him getting frustrated because he just wanted to get to like that time without having the measurable increments of growth. And so his dad was his coach and he was a running back. And so even when he would get the ball and he'd run. He always wanted to go straight, to get the touchdown. And then sometimes we just got to get the 10 yards. We got to get the first down. And so I think even in life, as we're growing and developing, we're not going to hit it all at once. But if we can help our children understand, you know what, and this was me, even if you don't pass your end of year test, I know that's probably taboo to say, but if you showed growth and gains and I was part of that, that to me was like the moment. Like, I think so, whether it was seeing my son with sports or seeing that student who previously, they may have been below grade level. I primarily taught 4th and 5th grade. And if they were below grade level, say they came to me sometimes 2nd, 3rd grade reading level, and they jumped to 4th grade reading level, but they still didn't pass their end of year test, I'm celebrating that. And I know that's kind of taboo in this day and age, but we have to celebrate small wins. I think that's what happens to us as adults. Sometimes when we don't get that big contract or we don't get that big whatever, we forget to celebrate the small wins. And so even in personal development, I'm a different version of me now than the version if you had talked to me 15, 20 years ago. I was, extremely, brash, direct, like, okay, we're not playing any games. But I understood, yes, that's part of my personality, but at the same time, I need to grow, because if no one can approach me, then what good is it that I have the information that they might need? So I think celebrating small wins and recognizing that everything's not going to be a touchdown, but sometimes you got to get that first down and you'll eventually get the touchdown.
I've never heard somebody use that analogy of football in personal development, but I absolutely love it, because I can, I love when people use analogies or parables or stories, because you can visualize it. And obviously it's football season, so you can definitely visualize it. And I just think about a player that didn't get a first down, but got 3 yards, and now it's 2nd and 7. And then now the next time is to get 4 yards, and now it's 2nd and 3. Yes. Or 3rd and 3. And now your goal is 3 yards closer before you get a reset.
Right.
And I think a lot of times what we're not teaching children, or what us as leaders aren't even doing for ourselves, is focusing on those small incremental yards that lead us to then getting to the goal line. How would you recommend somebody listening in right now, a leader, a change maker, an educator, how do they shift their perspective from always being so success oriented to breaking down success into yards?
That's a great question. I think if they would look at, if you have an environment or culture where previously, I'll say a new teacher, right? A new teacher coming into the classroom, and they were very frustrated the first school year because they did not get the gains, or they weren't able to lead. I don't even like to use the word manage the classroom, but they weren't able to lead their classroom in the way that they thought that they should. But then they come back the second year. But before you even get to the second year, you've seen that progress from the first semester to the second semester. They're getting their stride. Or if you want to look at it from the student standpoint, the thing that you can measure is, okay, well, before we had a school culture where students didn't feel like they had a voice. And now we have created a space where, they share their ideas, or they're willing to speak up. I had a friend who shared with me, it was so impressive. Her daughter goes to a charter school I won't say where, but she goes to a charter school, and she wrote out this long list of suggestions and recommendations of what she felt the school could do to improve, like, their uniform policy, this, that, and the other. And what I gained from that is she felt comfortable enough in that environment that they created a space for her to have a voice. So I think sometimes we get so caught up on data, and data is important. I understand data tells a story, but there's always people behind the story, so behind the data. So if you can look for people related wins and not just the data related wins, I think that's when, we all have a sense of feeling like, okay, I did accomplish something. Because if I only focused on the number, if I only focused on how many points we moved up on the test score, that's not telling the full story. It's really not. So it's not.
NaTasha, you are speaking my language right now. Because I think a lot of times in any industry, we get so caught up in like this idea of like what I call it as group analytics. It's like, yeah, we're trying to move the school from a B to an A, or we're trying 60% of our students are at grade level. Like, no, what about that one student that was 4 grade levels behind that now is at grade level. Let's focus on the one, because if we start focusing on the one, it creates a ripple effect, and then it multiplies, and then it establishes a new culture.
Mhm.
So, Natasha, you've had, and I'm so excited to get into this. You've had a very interesting career.
Yeah.
Education, corporate, you went from brash to a builder. I like how you put that earlier. Uh, like, can you walk me through like the story of how you got to where you are now in the business that you're running as well?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I probably have a very unique path in that because I'm so driven and because once I feel like I've accomplished something, it's like, what's next?
Mhm.
So I taught in rural Virginia for over 10 years. And then we moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was still in education. But at that time, there was a shift. I had hit the 10-year mark. I was like, I don't know. And I taught, you know, pre-COVID. So I feel like there's a pre-COVID and post-COVID teaching,
I
right?
agree.
And that's a whole other story. But I loved it. I'm not a teacher who can say that, you know, I woke up and I was burnt out and it was not that. I honestly can say I love teaching. I always told my husband he worked to make money. I worked to do what I love. And I did that. And
Can you
so
say, hold on, let's just
that may be
say that
swerve.
again. Can you say that again? I love that.
We had that kind of relationship. We've been married for 30, how long? 30, almost 32 years. I can say that. But no, seriously. And he loved it because he saw the passion in what I did, what I did. And he was part of the reason for that because, and this is, I'll get to this hopefully later. He was part of my why for my business because of his experience in school. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I taught for 10 years. And I was like, I want to do something different. I moved to Charlotte. And ironically, on LinkedIn, an insurance broker reached out to me. He said, I don't know, I think you'd be great at insurance. And I'm like, what? At that time, I had just stepped away from teaching because we had moved to a new city and you know, things were a little different. And I was like, okay, you know, I'm used to teaching in rural schools, not, you know, in the city schools. And so I was like, okay. And this is when the ACA rolled out. And so he literally paid for me to get my insurance license. Right. He paid for me and I worked. He opened up a storefront of insurance enrollment and I worked there doing that. And then another person reached out to me, tapped me on the shoulder. I see you have your insurance license. I think you'd be great at sales. Okay, I had never sold anything other than like some, you know, I don't know, maybe Mary Kay or something for a little bit. And so she reached out to me about selling Aflac. And so Aflac, if you know anything about it, I still love the Aflac products to this day, but it was 100% commission based, 100% commission based cold calling. Like I'm literally going through the different businesses in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I had a great director, and comes again about the story of leadership. I had a great leader who saw that in me, but she also saw that I need to give you something to kind of give you a little footstool. And so she gave me a small part of her book of business. So she said, I'm going to give you these clients. She didn't have to do that. I'm going to give you these clients to service, but then I'm going to help you build your book of business. And so I became a top performer with Aflac and was able to, you know, to kind of excel at that. And I was building my business in Charlotte. We moved back to Virginia. And in Virginia, I was like, I don't want to start from scratch again. And lo and behold, I started applying for jobs and I got a job with a company called Reed Group. And I had 3 job offers at that time, which is kind of unheard of now with this job market. And I was able to like take a full leap into this role of a client services account manager. And it was because I had to manage the Virginia retirement system account that they had just acquired and they needed someone with feet on the ground with this high touch white glove service. I ended up having to hire 2 people. Mind you, I'm a teacher. I'm coming out of the classroom, but they saw the transferable skills that I had. And so I was able to do that and build that partnership with that entity. And we were able to renew that contract. So we had the contract for 5 years. I'm out there, you know, on the ground, going to over 300 plus state agencies in Virginia, servicing them, whether it was Department of Corrections or the teachers, the higher ed. And so it gave me an opportunity to really touch a lot of different folk in that role. And so then fast forward, I can't make this up. I did not apply for my next role. So if you look at my resume, I moved to another company where it was also where we managed insurance benefits. And so we managed that for the retirement system. And the VP reached out to me on LinkedIn. So those of you who are not on LinkedIn, don't snuff at LinkedIn.
I'm
He
telling
messaged
you,
me on
LinkedIn
LinkedIn
is where it's at.
and he said, I noticed that you're working here. I think you'd be great. I'd like to talk with you. And I'm like, what? And so literally I did not apply for my next role and I was there, but because I believe of my ability to build relationships, understand people, my understanding of personalities, all the things that I did as a teacher, to me, it just translated over into corporate because it was people, the people skills and the relationship building that I think allowed me to have success. And so I literally got that role. And then I got promoted to director of client services. And I had a team of 14 reporting to me. So anytime a teacher doubts themselves about what they think they can and can't do, if you believe you can't, then you won't. So then, so then I just, decided I still wanted to reach and touch education, not going back into the classroom, but how can I touch even more? Because I understand if I have a class, that's only about 25 students. But if I can touch the school leaders, the district leaders, the teachers who are still impacting the kids, that's where the real difference is going to be made. And so that's when I started my consulting business, Ascension Solutions, where I'm providing the professional development, coaching, and consulting services to help them really go from a compliance-based to a connection-based type of school culture, and really helping them to lead with strengths and helping to remove the labels from students and show them that they are brilliant leaders. And I know that was a long story, but
I wish I had like the clap button, the applause, because that was it. And I think, you just gave a masterclass on the power of intentionality and relationships. And there's so much synergy in what you said between you as well as my career. I don't believe that I've ever applied for any of the jobs that I've ever received. Like when I was the director of school culture and advancement, I knew the board chair and I was a former board member. Even before that, as a dean at a school, that I was asked to be that, and I hadn't even taught before. As a teacher, I was recruited from another school. It was like, it's just weird. So, and it's so refreshing because I thought that I was the only one that had this type of trajectory. And I've just always positioned myself, I guess, in the right circles and built intentional relationships and networked that was in alignment with my ultimate goal and vision, and to serve and help people. And it's guided you to this place where you're transforming schools from compliance to connection. Now, what does that mean? Could you define and create a visual of what this means from going from compliance to connection across schools?
Right. So when I think about the compliance component, that's you managing and telling people what you want, and this is the outcome, versus the connection allows you to lead and they're getting the outcome, but it's because you created a space and a culture to where it almost organically happens. So I can be compliant, I can check the box. We've seen things, here lately that's been performative that we thought was really genuine, and it's not. And so you can have teachers who will check the box. Sure, I'll turn in your lesson plans. I'll do the things you tell me to do, but I'm miserable and I really want to get out. Or you've got the students who don't feel like, they are seen or heard, and they're like, okay, let me just do this work, but I'm not going to give you any more. So you're not getting the best out of them. So to me, if someone's compliant, that's just because they have to. We want to get to a place to where teachers and students want to. So that's what I think about when I say from compliance to connection, that the connection, that's part of the framework that I have of A.S.C.E.N.D, is connection. And it's so many ways that you can look at it. I feel like I had great connections with my parents. When I taught, there were some teachers who were very combative with parents. To this day, there are parents that I could call the students that I taught, and if I needed something, they would be there. I literally had a parent, one year she was very upset because he went to the next grade level and they kind of, questioned his end of the year test results, because the year before he had such a low grade, a low score. He came into my classroom. I kind of recognized he didn't have the confidence and, with his math ability. And so just really, really, as you said, took the time with that one student. I knew all students needed attention, but he needed something more. And it wasn't just math, it was confidence. And so really kind of speaking life into him. And so because I was able to build a connection with him, he would come to me if he had a problem and he didn't understand something. Whereas before he felt intimidated and didn't want to show the teacher previously that I don't know how to do this. So I think if you have connections with your staff, with your students, with the parents, the outcomes are going to come. Like I could pull the test scores. I can show you the data if you want to see it of how well my students did on their end of the year test. But that's not what, to me, it was all about. It was how much of an impact and imprint did I leave on their life in a positive way?
Anybody listening right now, I want you to ask yourself that question. I want you to really reflect, because it's allowing me to reflect in real time. Like, how much of an impact are you really leaving on the people that you're serving on a day-to-day basis? Like, are you just showing up and doing your job and leaving? Or are you intentionally connecting with children, with even your peers and colleagues, or all of the stakeholders within your school or your organization, in an intentional way where these children, parents, stakeholders can thrive? Or, in NaTasha's words, ascend. NaTasha, I want to know this framework. You know, it's everywhere in your marketing copy. You even mentioned it earlier, but I am one that loves acronyms, and I love frameworks. So I'm interested in those who are listening. Like, what is this Ascend framework, and how can someone put this into practice on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. The Ascend framework, it really came out of my years of experience as an educator, my understanding of personalities as a Wired That Way personality trainer, as a parent, as a wife, as a, as a student. Like when I think about it, what are the things that we all have in common that if we can do these things well, we can ascend? So it starts with awareness. And so awareness, whether it's having self-awareness or awareness of others, that's going to be kind of the springboard for things to start, going in that direction. And then support. I think about what was the support that I needed as a teacher? What's the support that my students need? What is the support that some parents need? What's the support that maybe even a principal or school leader needs? So that means you're tailoring things according to what that person needs. And then connection. We just talked about that, so I won't spend too much time there, but that's really driving that sense of belonging, that sense of you can come to me, that sense of I see you as a person. And then after awareness and support, connection, then there's empathy, because I think that's something that's lacking. And we have to have emotional intelligence to really lead with empathy. And I believe if we can lead with empathy and thinking about there is another person on the other side, it's not another data point. You may see it as that way, but I don't. It's not a data point. It's not just a little mark on a screen. That's a person. And if you can understand that you don't know what someone's bringing into that classroom, into that school building, and then nurture, that's part of the growth mindset of what are the things that are going well that I need to nurture? How can I nurture the strengths of this person? How can I show up for them in the way that they need? And then D is develop. Like when I think about develop, there are so many facets of that. So for me, it's all about developing strengths, because so often we focus on all of the deficits, and that's a lot of energy to expend on the deficits. I'll use, an example of someone who is naturally just a people-oriented person. You're naturally good on stage. You're naturally a talker, but then someone tells you to sit in front of the screen and I want you to just scrub data all day, right? Nope. So you can try to develop that, but it's still going to be painful for that person. So Ascend is really about how can you take this and then create a culture wherever it is, whether it's, in your home, whether it's in your school, whether it's in your classroom, in your corporate space, on your team. If we can kind of take that framework of Ascend, I believe you then will ascend.
At this moment, I just want to give you your flowers. I've worked with a lot of educators, and I've talked to a lot of people, even on the Contagious Culture podcast, and been on a lot of podcasts, and unfortunately have worked with a lot of leaders in education, and fortunately at the same time. And this framework, I feel like, is it's a blueprint for really being able to transform schools from within. And I can visualize every single step on this list and where I see many of the gaps in education. something that I mentioned earlier on another episode. I said, I don't believe the hype of a teacher deficit. I believe there's a leadership deficit, and that's why there's a teacher deficit in existence in education. And I believe if leaders were more aware, if leaders were more supportive, if leaders were intentionally focused on actually connecting with like human beings, I love what you said earlier, like there's another person on the other side. If leaders knew how to be empathetic, which is a skill that it took me years, 20, 30 years to learn. If leaders were nurturing, just as you are at home with your wife or your spouse or your husband or your kids, why aren't you like that with students in this school building? And if leaders focused on first identifying skills and strengths and then having the care or the compassion to want to develop strengths in teams, but then also children, I believe that our school systems in America would be how they used to be 20, 30 years ago. So I just wanted to thank you for sharing your framework, for doing this work. And anybody listening in right now, I want you to go follow NaTasha. I want you to go pay her tens of thousands of dollars, because this is the type of work that our schools need, and your schools and your children and your community need to bring her in to be able to do this work. How do you begin this work though? Like, this is, I guess, to take it from philosophical to practical. You walk into a school day one. There's somebody right now that I can hear them asking this question. Well, the framework is great, but where do I begin? Like, is this in order, or is there a certain step that you would recommend them starting with?
I always think we need to start with the awareness component. And so part of my background, I also have a master's in HR training and development, not to throw out that, but I think that's important that I also am trained in adult learning. And I would always do a needs assessment first, whether that's a culture survey, whether that is, kind of getting anecdotal information from the leaders, the teachers. We have to kind of see, where are we starting from? I could do a walkthrough in the school, but the other component is I have an assessment that I use as part of the framework. I share that I certified as Wired That Way trainer. It allows you then to see who those folk are in your building. So it's not about a label. I don't believe in taking personality tests and assessments for labels, but it's about relationships. Because once I know who you are, I know how to interact and engage with you better. Because if I don't understand the who, then I don't have the how. So I'm going to first start with, let's get that needs assessment. Let's assess where you are. Let's look at the climate. What is the percentage of your teachers that you can't retain? We got to figure out the why, and then we can go from there. But it starts with awareness. So I believe the other components of the framework, we can kind of move around as needed, because there may be some who are more nurturing, or there may be some where there is connection. But if you don't have the awareness, and the number one place is self-awareness. So if you are a school leader, if you are a district leader, I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to start with you. I don't want to start with the educators out, because you first have to see yourself. And that was the thing that was powerful for me when I first truly, truly understood what my natural personality wiring is. I can't be my best self if I don't know myself. And so there is an authentic, natural wiring of our personality and temperament that we have. And so when you heard me say that I was, very brash and direct, that was a natural tendency. That was a natural component of my personality. However, we don't have to leave it there. That is just the marker. And so if you don't have the marker to know where to kind of develop the strengths, or because that is still a strength of mine, that I will take charge, that I'll get things done. That's part of it. But I had to understand the how, because a natural strength carried to extremes becomes a weakness. So if I'm naturally, a doer, take charge, get it done, that is a strength. But if I do it and I become bossy, then that becomes a weakness. So I think having that awareness is the number one component, and we need to start there. And I start with, let's first assess where we are, so then we can know how to move forward.
Let me push back on that. So I believe that a lot of leaders, let me say this again, a lot of people in positions of authority know what's missing. They are aware of the issues, but there's an execution gap. They either don't want to make the change, don't want to communicate that they don't have the answers on what they need to make the change, or complain about the resources to being able to make the change. What would you say to those people?
I think you have to start where you can. So you may not have resources to change everything, but as we've talked about, you can change that one teacher's experience. So even if you can't change, if you're saying, okay, then it's too much. The environment is too much. Like there's so much that is beyond my control. Well, what about the one teacher who may come into your office and they're having, whether it's family challenges or whether they're having challenges with that particular student? Well, what can you do with this one? My pastor, my leader says, do for one what you wish you could do for many. And I think if we take that approach that, okay, you may not be able to move the entire mountain, but can you move a small pebble? And I think that's the same with the teacher, with the student. You may not reach every student. And I can't say that every student that I ever taught, I had the same impact as I did on some, but I am able to walk away to say, you know what? I was able to do it for that one. So I think, but if you're that person and you don't have a growth mindset and you don't want to change, I think that's part of the problem. So that's where the awareness comes in as well, because I do recognize that there are some who are going to just say, well, no, I don't want to, but then you don't have the mindset and maybe you don't need to be in this role. Sometimes we see teachers leaving, and maybe it's that some of the leaders who are the school leaders, maybe you're no longer in the role that you need to have. And that's okay, because sometimes we do have to kind of transition to the thing that's next. But I would just say start with something that, you can directly impact and not use it as an excuse, because, we make adjustments, or we should make adjustments and not just excuses, because we can make excuses about any and everything. But if it's you, you just gotta own that. And it's hard to see. And that's why the awareness piece to me is that mirror that we have to start with, because you may not want to admit, no, it's a you problem. We got to start there. And that might be hard for some school leaders to hear, but that's why I come in and I leave. I can say that. Whereas someone else may not be able to say that, but it may be very well that it starts with you, and we have to identify that, but also look at what it is that you can do and not focus on everything that you can't do.
I love what you mentioned earlier about essentially better leaders produce better results. And
Yes.
you have to become the best version of you before you can actually become the best version of the leader that you're supposed to be for the people that you're called to serve. And that's also taken me, that's one of the most expensive lessons that I've had to learn, is that when you're put into a position before you're fully developed and you create a lot more chaos than you're able to create success, because either your character, your ego, or a multitude of things, just a lack of resources or skills. But there are some leaders on here that are really, really wanting to make a change. They're bought in. What are some practical steps that you could give them where they're aware of the various challenges, but they just don't know how to either implement those challenges or what they need to be able to do moving forward? What are some practical steps or things that they can do, let's say this week or next week, that would be able to at least move the needle forward 1 to 10%?
I think being open to hearing from your teacher. So this week, you literally could go into a classroom or, if you're in the hallway, and ask one teacher, what's one thing that you need from me that I can do for you this week? Or what's one thing that would make you feel more connected and supported right now? So you don't even have to do it in a full meeting where you're going to ask people to raise their hand, because most of the time in those settings, you're not going to get an honest answer. Most people will not. So you could literally this week start engaging directly and just check in, because, especially with a lot of the new teachers who are coming in, I'm reading statistics where teachers don't last beyond 3 years now when they're coming into the classroom, which is very scary to think about. So going into the school and going through the hallways and just kind of checking in, that's one thing. And then I would say also another thing is you can look at, well, what has been the thing that's worked well? I think we oftentimes look at what's wrong. What's something that you can see, that you can pinpoint that's worked well And let's build on that. And it might be something very small. It might be some sort of parent and family engagement activity or something that happened, with the students, whatever it might be. Find that one thing. And you should be able to hopefully find one thing. Let's build on that. So that's where develop comes in. Like, what can we do? I mean, I would just say also just kind of be reflective. What's one of the relational behaviors that you can identify that, I may need to start, checking in the first couple of minutes with my staff, just, how are you doing? Or doing something that makes them feel seen and valued, because I believe that's what they want. I hear a lot of times with educators now, they don't feel like their school leaders hear them, or that anything that they share, their thoughts or opinions are taken into consideration or valued. So as adults, we have our own thought process. We come into the classroom with our own experiences. They want to be heard. So what is one way that you can intentionally allow your staff and teachers to be heard would be another action step.
Can we just pause and focus in on the check-in really quickly? I don't think that a lot of people are either trained or know how to approach and lead a check-in properly. And it's interesting, I had to learn this in therapy, where when you're checking in with a spouse or when you're checking in with someone, it's not just, hey, how are you doing? Everything good? All right, good. And then you leave. It's like, what does that check-in process actually, like, what is the game plan? So can we, I don't know if we could role play. And can you tell people from a leadership perspective what that check-in looks like in real time? It's not you just walk into a class during their planning on the spot and say, hey, what are some things that are going on? And then you're taking notes and then you leave and then there's no real action or implementation forward. What does a check-in look like? And why is that so important?
Yeah, and I think, and I'll clarify that I don't think it has to always be a formal check-in. It literally can be, I noticed when you came in this morning, XYZ, or I noticed that this past week, you're usually bubbly and, talkative, but, you've had jokes and everything that we normally have. Is everything okay? Because I noticed you're a little bit more quiet. Because, and it's interesting you say that about therapy, because that's literally one of the things that I've learned is, what is it that you need from me? But it's based on what have I noticed that's changed. But you can't notice anything if you're, behind the closed door and you're not really out there with the teachers or the students. So in order for me to be able to truly check in, I have to be where you are in your space. And so for me, I would say that they would probably need to, ask based on what they're noticing. But if you're not around to notice that there has been a disposition change, because it doesn't always have to be about academics and whether or not it's something school related. And that's kind of where I'm going. Like, if we can build a connection based on that human part, that's where the difference is going to be made. And so you don't have to get into someone's total, their personal business. But if you don't have enough interaction and engagement with your staff to notice that you're normally outgoing, bubbly, talkative teacher is kind of withdrawn, or the one who's normally got everything together, whether, you turn in lesson plans or whatever, and it's late all the time. Are you asking them, are they okay? Not just where are your lesson plans or why didn't you do this, that, and the other? So that's what I mean by checking, like the informal, because I'm paying attention. Do you see them as that person and asking them, are they okay, based upon that, and not just a task? I think so often it's focused on a task, and it doesn't have to be based on the task unless you're noticing from that task that they did or didn't do or something. That's going to lead you to, is everything okay? Is there something I can do? Or they just maybe need to have a conversation. So that's kind of how I would look at a check-in, not necessarily anything that's the formal check-in. I think that's a different process that I would have, like, when you're going to, from beginning to end, how that would look, but just the informal. Because what I'm hearing when I'm talking to teachers is they don't feel like anyone cares. They feel like they're a target. They feel like, it's not about, them as a human anymore. It's just get this done. We got to get the test scores. No, let's pull it back. I see you as a person first. And that's also where the empathy comes in too.
I like how you clarified that. It's like every time doesn't need to be a formal check-in. And what I hear is authentic engagement. It's if somebody walks by you and they're tearing up, not just to continue to walk to your meeting. It's like, hey, is everything all right? And even if they're not in the space to be able to divulge all that information, it's just having the decency and consideration of someone else other than the task or other than yourself. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
NaTasha, where can people find you? Like where, like you this has been a master class in school transformation. And I think we focus so much on programming and curriculum development and all of these different things, but awareness,
Mm-hmm.
support, connection, empathy, nurturing, developing, like these things are foundational things that are so much more important than all of these tangible outcomes that we're trying to be able to create as schools or invest in as schools. So where can people find you? And then what would it look like once they connect with you?
Sure. So I'm very much on LinkedIn as NaTasha Grimes, but also on my business page at Ascension Solutions, on Ascension Solutions on TikTok, as well as on Instagram, but primarily LinkedIn is where I am. Also have my Ascension Solutions website, and I'm actually going to be doing a webinar on, I don't know when people will view this, but it's November the 6th on leading with strengths. And so that's a free webinar. And I'll have that information on my LinkedIn page as well. But they can also find me at info@ascensionsolutions.online. And I'll share that information with you as well to be able to share with the audience. But I'm on LinkedIn, NaTasha Grimes. I'm there all the time sharing insights as well as on my Ascension Solutions page. But would love for those who want to hear more to join me on November 6th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the Leading with Strengths webinar that I'm going to be hosting.
Can I get a sneak peek? You know, November 6th is a long time from when we're shooting this. Like, what is, I guess, define what leading with strengths even means.
Yeah. So it's a lot of what we just talked about. Like, first of all, you have to know who you are. What are your strengths? And so we'll take time to really just at a high level, because I won't be able to do it in 60 minutes. But what are some of the strengths that, basically our 4 personality temperaments that we identify have? So there are natural strengths that someone who is a natural talker, people-oriented, energetic. There's a natural strength of someone who is take charge, let's get things done. There's also the natural strength of someone who's empathetic and more analytical. And then also that individual who is more dependable and easygoing. And if you realize that you should have diversity within your teams when you're looking at your teams within your schools. So I'm going to be talking about how you can identify by visible cues what someone's personality is, and as well as those strengths. Because I think about one of my colleagues who was probably one of the most laid back individuals. He was amazing with students. But if you were to put him in charge of, say, planning a field trip or anything where his organization involved, it was not going to happen. Yeah, no. But we oftentimes set ourselves and others up for failure because we want to force them to be a version of themselves that's not a natural strength. And it doesn't mean that they can't do it, but it may be that you really should focus on, you know what, you're probably going to be better to have the microphone during the school pep rally versus this other person who is a lot more introverted. And, they're better behind the scenes. They'll plan it and organize it for you. So if you're a school leader and you understand that, that's going to be just gold. But also as a teacher, if you understand that your students have strengths, and if you can bring out the strengths of your students. I did a conference, a couple of months ago on removing the labels, from labels to leadership, because oftentimes our students who have certain personality traits are labeled. I often share the story of my husband who literally was held back in first grade because he was deemed too energetic, too talkative. He wasn't socially ready, all the things that, got him in trouble. And he said, I never had a teacher who really saw me as anything other than a troublemaker. And now he's very successful in corporate using that very thing they told him was a problem, right? He's naturally a talker, naturally good on stage. So he went on to be in sales and district leader and all the different things, but he didn't have a teacher who saw that as a strength. My daughter is the same thing. She's very much outgoing, talkative. She's a recruiter. She gets to talk to people all day. So if you can see that as a strength, not only within the classroom, but with your team, how much better will that school culture grow and thrive? And that's the goal for the webinar.
All right, you sold me. Where can I sign up, NaTasha? Where is the link?
Sure, I will send the link to you. Absolutely.
All right. So look, NaTasha, and I always ask this question: 60 seconds. You have 60 seconds to transform your ideal target audience. What would you say?
If I could transform my ideal target audience, it would be that I want you to see the potential in your individuals that are in your building, whether it is a teacher, a student, it could be a parent, it could be anyone. I want you to see that everybody has the ability to grow and be the best version of themselves, but it has to be intentional. And if you can learn what are those strengths that that person brings, what are the things that's going to help them want to be more connected because they feel like they're connected and not having to comply, then that's the thing that we want to hone in on. So oftentimes we are focused on the problems and not looking at what that person brings that might be a solution. So if you are a school leader and you're frustrated, if you're a teacher and you're frustrated, I want you to first take that kind of self-assessment of awareness, like, who am I? Why am I feeling this way? And oftentimes we can kind of go back to how we're naturally wired. I'm going to be very frustrated if you don't give me some order and structure, right? And that's the type of teacher I am, but there are others who don't need that. So if you can start with, who am I? What is it that the other person needs, and not focused on what it is that you need in that situation. So if you're a school leader, you may need things to look a certain way for you, but what about the entire student body? But then we want to look at that student. We want to look at the kids that are in our classroom. How can we show them that they are brilliant just the way they are? Bringing out the authentic version of them, but we've got to be able to visibly see those things and allow them to show up in the way that they are naturally wired. And so I'm all about making sure that you know who you are to start with, and then using the full framework that I have to create the culture that's going to allow those individuals and folk to grow and be that best version of themselves and feel like they belong and can thrive.
That's it. That's it. NaTasha, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, for your gift, and for how you've been able to transform so many people from your work and from your obedience, in a sense, as well. If you're still listening to us, how do you make yourself more aware before we can approach our schools? How can we look inside before we start wanting to be able to create income or outcomes within our school? How can we focus on showing up more supportive in our efforts, tailoring the needs of our children, the needs of our stakeholders, the needs of our parents to our initiatives? How can we create connection, actual human connection, and potentially check in with a staff member, a team member, a colleague, or a student? Maybe call a parent that you notice has been a little bit off of their game. How can we be more empathetic and recognize that there's another person on the other side of that decision, that process, and that very thing that we're implementing within our school building? How can we implement a growth mindset and nurture, not just nurture talent, but nurture people in our actions and how we show up on a daily basis? And through all of this, how can we be truly committed to developing the minds, the strengths, and the talents of the next generation of globally competitive leaders of the future? If any of this resonated with you, I want you to go follow NaTasha on LinkedIn, and I want you to sign up for her November 6th event, as well as like, subscribe, and share this episode with somebody that needs to be able to understand how to ascend in their leadership so that they can also take students to another level as well. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. One of the questions that we always ask is, what type of culture are you spreading? The energy you bring is the culture you create. Make yours worth catching. See you next time.